We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 139a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought the Mishnah which said that if a father writes over his property to his son, he says Mehayom Mula Achar Misa. What that means is that the father will get the produce from the property until he dies, and then when the father dies, the son will get the property plus all the produce as well. The son owns the Guf HaKarka while the father is alive, and the son only gets the produce after the father dies. And so the Gemara said that the implication from the Mishnah is if the father dies and there's produce that is mechuber lakarka that's attached to the ground, the implication of the Mishnah is that also goes to the son. That's considered to be part of the karka. Whatever is talush, that belongs to the father. Whatever the father detached from the ground, so the father can do whatever he wants with it. And whatever is talush at the time that the father dies, that's inherited by all of the yarshim. But whatever is mechuber lakarka, that goes to that particular son. And the Gemara continues, is that really true? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, that we evaluate that which is attached to the ground for the buyer. And the Rashbam explains, it says in the Brisa that we evaluate whatever is attached to the ground for the buyer. This is found in the Tosefta, Meseches Ksubis. Let's say the son sells and the father dies. If there is part of the property is mechuber lakarka, it's attached to the ground like produce, shamin lo, so then we evaluate it for him, meaning we evaluate it for the lokeach. Well, now earlier from that, Katani, it says as follows. The case is, HaKosiv kol nechasav livno. Let's say a person writes over all of his property to his son. Tzarech sheyichtov mehayom ula'achar misa. He has to write mehayom from today, ula'achar misa, and after death. Upeirusha, and the explanation is, HaKosiv kol nechasav mehayom ula'achar misa livno. Again, the case is like we had, a person writes over all of his property mehayom ula'achar misa to his son. Again, that's a situation where the son is going to get the produce from the property after the father dies, but until the father dies, the father gets the produce. This son who now got the property, he sells from the property, he sells it while his father is alive. And then after some time the father dies. So the buyer is going to acquire whatever was sold to him in the property itself. Now, if in that property there's any produce that's attached to the ground, the buyer doesn't get it, except the karka itself, except the land itself. But the peiros, the produce, even though it's attached, that goes liyarshin, that goes to the heirs. Lafikach, therefore, shaman osan lokeach, we evaluate them for the lokeach. We evaluate what are they worth for the buyer. V'nosein demeyan liyarshin, and the value is going to go to the yarshim, is going to go to the heirs. And the idea over here is that the property which the son sold to the lokeach, to the buyer, that property, of course, goes to the buyer, but the buyer, even though he's going to get whatever's attached to the ground, he's going to have to pay for that. He's not entitled to what is attached to the ground. Rather, it's really the yarshim that are entitled to what is attached to the ground, and that's why it's shamin lelokeach. We evaluate it to the lokeach. The buyer takes the mechubar and lakarka, but the buyer has to pay for that part. That part, the buyer does not get automatically together with whatever was sold to him. And so the point over here is that this brisa, this Tosefta, says the opposite of what's implied by the Mishnah. Here it seems to be saying that whatever is mechubar lakarka when the father dies, that really does not belong to the son, because then it would automatically go over to the buyer. Rather, whatever is mechubar lakarka really belongs to all of the yarshim. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Ula says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan bivno, kan biacher. In one case, we're talking about his son, and in the other case, we're talking about just a regular person, another person. However, because a person, he's very close to his son, and that's why we treat, with regards to his son, we treat it differently. We treat the mechubar lakarka differently. And the Rashbam explains, Umashani kan bivno, means as follows, Masnisin. In our Mishnah, Shekasav livno, the case of our Mishnah is that he just wrote over the property to his son, again, mehayom la'achar misa, v'lo mochron la'achar b'chayav, and the son never sold anything during the lifetime of the father. The daito shaladam krova etzel beno, because the person is close to his son, kedim mefarish l'kamez, will be explained. The ledas kein akni le gufa la'achar misa, Im peiros hamechubarin. When the father gave this over to the son and said mehayom la'achar misa, and the idea is again he takes over the property after the father dies, it's with that understanding that he gets whatever is attached to the ground as well. The liski ihu gufe that he himself should get whatever's attached to the ground. But the father is never thinking that if a buyer comes along and buys it from his son, then he is going to get, then the buyer is going to be entitled to what is mechuber lakarka. That the father is not thinking. He's only thinking with regards to his son in terms of the mechuber lakarka. Or the son himself won't give it over to a buyer, because he's just a different person. He's another person. He's not a son. Ela haguf, he's only giving him the actual land. Velo haperos, and not the produce, afagav de mechubar, even though they're attached. And so essentially what the Rashbam is explaining is that really fundamentally, what is the son getting when the father dies? The son is getting the land, but the son gets the mechubar lakarka as well, because that's the father's intention. When he says me'ayom lachar misa, he has in mind that the son should be able to get the peros mechubar and lakarka as well. But if the son should go ahead and sell those peros mechubar to somebody else, the father never has in mind that really that other person should be entitled to the mechubar lakarka, and that's why the mechubar lakarka it actually goes to all of the Yarshim. As the Rashbam continues, Kan Ba'achir, here in the Bryce and the Tosefta, we're talking where it's being sold to somebody else. Shemachra ben la'achar b'chayav, again, he's selling the property to someone else during the lifetime of the father, so there the buyer who he's selling to is not automatically entitled to the produce that's attached to the ground. He has to pay for it. That's the idea of shaman, we evaluate. And the Rashbam notes, V'hu adin, and the same would be true. Im kasvu av la'achar mehayom la'achar misa. Let's say we didn't have a case with the son at all. Let's say the father just wrote over his property mehayom la'achar misa to some acher, to some other individual. So there also, she'ein lo chelik b'mechubar, and there that person, when the father dies, he's not going to get whatever's mechubar lakarka. The idea that you get whatever's mechubar lakarka is a halacha that is specific only to the son. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, hiniach bonim gedolim ukatanim. Let's say a father dies and he leaves over sons, no daughters. We're talking here just about sons, and some of the sons are adults and some of the sons are minors. Ein hagedolim misparnasin al yedei hakatanim. The adults, they are not supported through the shares of the minors. Velo hakatanim nizonin al hagedolim, and the minors are not supported through the shares of the adults. Ela cholken b'shava, rather everyone divides everything evenly, and everyone is just supported from their particular share. Nasu hagedolim, let's say the adults get married, Yisu hakatanim, so then the minors also, they have the right to use the estate's funds to get married. V'yimamru katanim, but if the minors say, Harei anu nosin, kiderech shenasasim atem, we're going to get married just like you got married. Here we're talking where they're saying, we're going to get married just like you got married during our father's lifetime. Now, after our father died, we want to use funds from the estate for that as well. So for that, ein shomen lahem. That we don't listen to them. Elamasha nasan lahem aviyam nasan, whatever their father gave to them during his lifetime, he gave. That's not considered in the calculation of the division of the inheritance. And the Mishnah continues with the same basic halacha by daughters. Hiniach bonos gedolos ukatanos. Let's say the father dies and he leaves daughters. Some are adults and some are minors. Ein hagadolos misparnasos al yedei hakatanos. The adult daughters are not supported from the shares of the minor daughters. Velo hakatanos nizonos al hagadolos, and the minor daughters are not supported with the shares of the older daughters. Elacholkos b'shava, rather again, everything is divided evenly. And the Mishnah continues, Nasu gedolos, if the adult daughters get married, Yisu katanos, so the minor daughters also have a right to use the funds for the estate to get married. V'imamru katanos, but if the minor daughters say, Hareyanu nosos kederech shenasasim atem, we want to get married just like you got married during the lifetime of our father, and shomenland, so then again we don't listen to them. And finally the Mishnah says, Zechomer bebanos mi bebanim, in the following way, it's stricter by daughters than by sons, Shahabanos nizonos al habanim, because the daughters are supported from the shares of the sons, ve'ein nizonos al habanos, but daughters are not supported from shares from the other daughters. And the Rashbam explains, Hiniach bonim gedolim ukatanim, again the father leaves over sons, and some are adults and some are minors. B'delo kasav nechasim minori. First the Rashbam points out this is not a continuation of the previous Mishnah. Here we are not talking where he writes over the property to one particular son. So misparnasin means lavush uchsus. Misparnasin means you're supported specifically with garments, with clothing. And nizonin means mizonos mamish. Nizonin means that you're getting food, that kind of sustenance. Why do we use a different term? Why does the Mishnah sometimes say misparnasin and sometimes say nizonin? The Rashbam explains, Ulefisha parnasas hagedolim merubin mi parnasas haketanim. Since parnasa, meaning clothing from adults adults is more than for minors. But when it comes to sustenance, which is the food and just taking care of the individuals, that's going to be more when it comes to ketanim, when it comes to minors, than when it comes to adults. So and that's why the language of the Mishnah is that, again, the minors hold back, so to speak, from giving the parnasa to the gedolim, and the gedolim hold back, so to speak, from giving the mizonos to the ketanim, just because those are the terms that apply to those specific individuals. And again, we're talking about mitfusas habayis, we're talking about from the estate, from the funds of the estate. Do you have to provide extra for these mizonos, for this parnasa? And the answer is you don't. Rather, the estate is divided evenly via sparnes, v'yizon, kol echad michalko. Everyone should get the parnasa and the mizonos they need from his own portion. Nasu gedolim nashem v'yasu tzarchei chuppah mitfusas habayis la'achar misas avi and kodem chaluka. Let's say the adult sons, they get married, they marry women, and they take care of all the expenses of the wedding from the estate before the estate has been divided. So if they do that, so then Yisukam HaKatanim Kamokein Kodim Chaluka. So the minors also, they're going to get to use the funds from the estate for their weddings, and that's not going to count in terms of the division. It's not going to come from their share, but it's going to come from everybody's shares equally, just like the adult sons got to do that. The minors will also. However, Vimamru Katanim Lachar Misas Avin, but let's say the minor sons say after their father dies, Hare Anu Nosim Ata, we want to get married now, just like you used funds while our father was alive, he paid for your wedding, so therefore it should be paid for our wedding, and it shouldn't really come out exclusively from our share of the inheritance. So for that already ain't shomen lem. That we don't listen to them. Whatever the father gave in his lifetime, that he gave. That's not counted against various individual shares. This is how the Gemara will explain this line. And the Rashbam continues, let's say the father left daughters and not sons. Here the explanation is exactly the same as we explained by the sons, same explanation by the daughters. Again, if the adult daughters get married after the father dies, then the minor daughters have that same right. And finally, the Mishnah said, "V'zeh chomer bebanos, heichad debanos yorshos mehechad debanim yorshin." The following stringency applies where the daughters are inheriting, as opposed to when the sons. V'ikonami banos, meaning when you have sons and also daughters bahadayu. Let's say you have sons together with daughters. The difference is as follows: shahabanos nizonos min habanim. When you have sons and daughters, the daughters actually take support from the shares of the sons. Ben chasim merubin. When you have, let's say, a large estate that's being inherited, like we learned in the Mishnah at the beginning of the parak to Lakaman, the parak coming up, Habonim Yirshu v'Habonos Yizonu. In such a situation, the sons do inherit, but the daughters are able to take mizonos. Tahachi have it tanai ksuba, because that's part of the condition of the ksuba. Benon nukvan diyahavin lechem inoi, the daughters that I have from you. So inon mitzanon minachasai, they're going to get supported from the property. Ve'ein nizonos min habonos. That's not true from daughters, meaning hakatanos min hagadolos. Let's say you only have daughters, so we don't say that the young daughters get mizonos from the shares of the older daughters, because in a situation where there's only daughters, so all of the daughters are now inheriting, so leka tanai ksuba demazon benon nukvan, so then you don't have that condition of the ksuba of support of the daughters. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Hai Gadolachi, if the oldest brother, Delavash v'ichsi mi beisa, let's say he gets clothing from the estate, so my David, what he took that is not subtracted from his share, and the idea is that the oldest brother, he takes care of the estate, he's involved in the business affairs, and therefore he needs to dress nicely, he needs to dress appropriately, and whatever funds he uses in order to do that, that is not subtracted from his share of the inheritance. But the Gemara continues, Va'anon tanan, but then we learn in our Mishnah, Ein ha'gedolim isparnas and ala katanim, that the adults are not allowed to take parnasa from the share of the katanim, and here it seems that the brother is allowed to take clothing. It seems to be contradicting our Mishnah, and the Gemara answers, Masnisin b'sharcha, our Mishnah is talking about an unemployed. When the brother's unemployed, he's not actually using those clothing, so to speak, for the benefit of everyone, so then already he's not allowed to take. If he takes from the estate, from those funds in order to get clothing, that is going to be taken away, that amount will be deducted from his share. And the Gemara says, Sharcha, if you're talking about someone who's unemployed, pshit, that's obvious. Of course, why should he be able to take funds from the estate just for his clothing if he's not even an employed individual? And the Gemara says, no, Ma'u Detema, what might you have said, Nichel, who it is good for the rest of the brothers, Delo Ninvel, because otherwise it's going to be a disgrace. They don't want him to walk around and look disgraceful, and so therefore maybe they do want the older brother to have nice clothing, even if he's unemployed. Kamash Malon, so that's what the Mishnah is teaching, that if he's unemployed, he does not have a right to take clothing unless he deducts that amount from his share. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Nasu gedolim yisu katanim, if the adult sons, if they get married, so then the minor sons are also allowed to get married. My Kamar, what exactly is the Mishnah saying? Amar Rav Yehuda says, Hachi Kamar, this is what the Mishnah is saying. Nasu gedolim la'achar misasavi, and if the adult sons get married after their father's death, and they take funds from the estate for that purpose, so then yisu katanim la'achar misasavi, and the minor sons have the same right. They also can get married after the death of their father and use funds from the estate. Aval nasu gedolim b'chayi avian, but if the adult sons get married while their father's alive, v'yamru katanim le'achar misasavian, and then the minor sons, they say after their father died, harayanu nosin kederach shenasasim atem, we want to get married in the same way you got married, ein shomen lahen, we do not listen to them, elamasha nasan lanavian nasan, whatever their father gave them, he gave them, they do not have the right to make that claim. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, hiniach banos gedolos ukatanos, let's say the father dies and he leaves over only daughters, adult daughters, and minor daughters. And the Gemara says, Shalach le Avua bar Ganiva l'Rava. Avua bar Ganiva sent to Rava the following: Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us our Rebbe. Lovsa v'yachla v'yamda v'nisis. Let's say the woman, let's say the girl, she borrows money and she uses the money, she consumes it, and then she goes ahead and she gets married, and now her property is going to transfer over to the authority of her husband. So Baal lokeach have o yoresh have. What's the husband considered when he takes that property from the woman that he marries? Is he considered a buyer of that property, or is he considered a yoresh, an heir of that property? And the Gemara explains, Lokeach have, he might be considered a buyer. Umilva alpeh eino gova min halakuchos. And in this case, she borrowed, so she owes money, but this was a milva alpeh. And the halacha is that a lender is not allowed to collect, a creditor is not allowed to collect from buyers when it comes to a milva alpeh. Only a milva bishtar do we say that there's a lien on the property and he can collect from buyers. And if that's the case, by this milva alpeh, the creditor will not be able to take the property anymore, because now it's been bought, so to speak, by the husband. Odil, or maybe Yoresh Hava, maybe the husband is considered an heir of the property, and then in such a situation the creditor would be able to collect from the husband, but because Umilva Alpeh Govim and Ayorshin, because by a Milva Alpeh, when you have a loan, even if it's not written down, one is allowed to collect from Yorshim, one can collect from the heirs. That was the question. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei, so he said back to him, this is the response of Rava, Tanina, we learn the answer in our Mishnah. It says, Nasu Gedolos, it says if the adult daughters get married after the death of their father, so then Yisu Ketanos, so then the Ketanos, the minor daughters, also get married. So my love, doesn't it mean to say, Nasu Gedolos Lebal, let's say the adult daughters, they get married to a husband, Yisu Ketanos Mi Baal, so then the minor daughters are allowed to take from what is now the husband's property, he's taken the property from his wife, and they can take from those funds in order to get married. And so therefore you see they're allowed to take from him. He's not simply considered a buyer, he's considered a Yoresh. And the Gemara says, no, that's not what the Mishnah means at all. It just means Nasu Gedolos Lebal. It just means that if the adult daughters get married to a husband, so Yisu Ketanos Lebal, so then the minor daughters also can get married to a husband, but they're taking from the common estate. It does not mean that they're taking from the husband. But the Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? Vatani Rabbi Chia, but the way Rabbi Chia taught it was, Nasu Gedolos Lebal, that if the adult daughters get married to a husband, Yisu Ketanos Mibal, then the minor daughters can get married and take from that husband. So on the contrary, they are allowed to take from him. We see that he's a Yoresh. And the Gemara says still, Dilma maybe Shani Parnasa. Maybe it's different when it comes to Parnasa, this kind of Parnasa, the Isla Kala, because already the word goes out and it's considered to be, the Gemara is saying it's considered to be a Milva Bishtar, meaning the Gemara is suggesting that maybe the husband is a buyer, and again, if the husband is a buyer, so he's not responsible to pay the debts of a Milva Alpeh, but it could be when it comes to the Parnasa of the daughters, so Parnasa already is something everybody knows about, that has a status of a Milva Bishtar, and even if the husband is considered a buyer, still they can collect from his property, from his money in order to pay for Parnasa. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Rav Papa l'Rav, Rav Papa said to Rava, Lav hainu deshalach Ravin bigarte, but isn't this the same thing that Ravin sent in his letter from Eretz Yisrael? He sent the same kind of question. Misha meis v'iniach almona ubas. The case over here was a person dies and he leaves over a widow and a daughter. So almanaso nizonas minachasav. So the halach is the widow, she gets supported from his property. And nisas habas, let's say the daughter gets married, almanaso nizonas minachasav. Still, the widow gets supported from his property. And mesa habas, and let's say the daughter dies, Amar Rav Yehuda ben Achoso shel Rav Yossi Rav Chanina, Rav Yehuda, the son of the sister of Rav Yossi Rav Chanina, says, Al Yadi Hayamaisa, I had a case like this, V'Amar, and they said there also, Al Manaso Nizonas min Chasav. The widow continues to get supported from his property, and that is even in a situation of a husband. So clearly, I'Amrit Bishlama Yoresh Have, if you say correctly that the husband is a Yoresh, is an heir, Mishamachi Al Manaso Nizonas min Chasav. That's why the widow would be supported from the property. But if he's considered a buyer of his wife's property, so again we're back to the same question. Why should she be supported from his property if he's a buyer? So then we say that there's no lien on the property by a milva al peh that you can take from the buyers, so she should not be able to be supported from his property. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Ilav the Sholach Ravin, if not for the fact that Ravin sent this, Anon lo Yadinan, we wouldn't know this. We would know this idea already, that he's considered to be like a Yoresh. V'atanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Elu hein shein chozrin b'yovel. The following types of property do not return at Yovel. Generally, by Yovel, the property returns to the original owner, but that's not true across the board. For example, Habechora, let's say the firstborn, that extra portion the firstborn gets, that doesn't go to be divided among all of the heirs, among all of the brothers. Once Yovel comes, that stays with the Bechor. And the Rashbam explains, Umakshin, and the Gemara then asks, V'atani Rabbi Chia, but didn't Rabbi Chia teach, Nasu Gedolos L'Baal, if the adult daughters get married to a husband, so Yisu Ketanos Mibal, then the minor daughters, they can take from the husband funds in order to get married. Alma Miyad Habal Motzim, you see they're taking from the husband, Mechlal Sheichniso Lo Kol HaMammon, it seems like all of that money went to the husband, it was transferred to the husband when the adult daughter got married to the husband. V'afilu Chelak Aktanos, even that portion that those younger daughters are going to take, they're taking it from the husband. You see from this, midemotzi and miyada, from the fact we're taking from him, the yoresh have, he must have the status of a yoresh, of an heir, the ilokeach have, because if he was a buyer, so milval peh, this is a milval peh, this is just a loan without a document, velotarif mimeshabdi, it's not something that can be collected from the chasim mishubadim. Umeshani, and then the Gemara answers, liolam lokeach have, really we're going to say that this husband is a buyer, miu milva bishtari hai parnasas hakatanos, but nevertheless, the support of the younger daughters, that's actually considered to be a milva bishtar. The shani parnasas nesu, and it's different when you're giving this money for the purpose of getting married. The islay kala, because there already the word goes out. Everybody knows that needs to be taken care of. Uchamilva bishtar damya, it's like a debt that's owed, that it was already written up in a document. Hilkach tereva mimishavdi, that's why that can be collected from the chasim mishubadim. Umotzi anafilu miyad halakuchos, that can even be taken from buyers, and that's why it's taken from the husband. And the Rashbam continues, Amar le Rav Papa le Rav Papa said to Rava, the boy lemifshan mid Rabbi Chia, because again he wanted to answer from Rabbi Chia that Yoresh have, that the husband is considered a Yoresh. Lav hainu de shalach Ravin, isn't that the same of what Ravin sent to Meha Ikol Mifshat Shaber the Yoresh have? Here we would have a real proof that the husband is a Yoresh. This is the case with the Almana, with the widow. Almanasa nizonas betnai ksubasa, a widow she's supported. That's part of the condition of her ksuba. Shekach kasav laviata yosov vevesu mitzina minachasai kol yimei megar ar malusech. That's what it says in the ksuba. She gets the support. Nisas abbas v'ichnisa nechasim lebala. If the daughter gets married and now she's taken all of the property and given it under the authority of her husband, almanason izonas minachasav, the widow still gets support from the property. And mesa habas v'yarshab, let's say the daughter dies and now the husband inherits. Amar Rav Yehuda Amorahu, the Rashbam says Rav Yehuda over here is referring to the Rav Yehuda the Amora. V'amra almanason izonas deliolam izonas achatinase o shetitba ksubasa. The widow still gets supported, even in this case where the daughter died and the husband inherited, because she's always supported until she either gets married or until she gets her ksuba, claims her ksuba, or sheyirtzu hayorshin litin la ksubasa, or let's say the heirs want to give her the ksuba, kedaminan b'ksubas, as we explain in Meseches ksubas. And so the Gemara said, if you're going to say the husband, with regards to the property of his wife, even while she's alive, yoresh have, is considered an heir. That's why it says, when the daughter gets married, then the almana, then the widow is supported. Even though this kind of support is, you don't really collect from the chasim mishubadim, the hainu lekuchos, which would be buyers, miyorshin miyagavi, you would collect from yorshim, and again the husband is considered to be a yoresh. That would make sense. But if you're going to say that the husband is a buyer, amayni zonis, why should she be supported? But we learned in Meseches Gittin, again, you don't take for this kind of support. You don't take from the chasim mishubadim. That's for the betterment of the world. And the Rashbam continues, Vatanan bebechoros, but we learned in the Mishnah in Bechoros, she'ein chozrin leba'alein, she'ein chozrin ela memkar. Again, this is talking about property that returns in Yovel, only sales of property that returns in Yovel, but the following does not return. Ha-bechora chelak bechoras ha-bechor. Again, that means the extra portion the firstborn gets. Like we say over there, it's called a matana, it's a gift, to give him this double portion. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis.